Hey everyone, and welcome back to Divine Decoded. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We're hoping to reach 2,000 subscribers by the end of February, and your support would really help us get there. Today we're taking a deep dive into the book of Exodus, chapters 1 through 10. It's a story that's foundational to our faith, packed with drama, intrigue, and powerful lessons about God's power and faithfulness.
You're absolutely right. These chapters lay the groundwork for the epic story of the Israelites' journey from slavery to freedom, a story that continues to resonate with people of faith thousands of years later.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with verses 1.1 to 7. We're introduced to the descendants of Jacob who had settled in Egypt generations earlier. It's incredible to see how God's promise to Abraham that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky is beginning to unfold. But as we know, their peaceful existence in Egypt is about to change drastically.
What's fascinating here is the shift in power dynamics. Verses 1.8 to 14 introduce us to a new Pharaoh, one who didn't know Joseph and felt threatened by the burgeoning Israelite population. This Pharaoh, driven by fear and a desire for control, decides to enslave the Israelites, forcing them into hard labor.
It's a chilling reminder of how quickly fear and prejudice can take root, leading to the oppression of an entire people. And then in verses 1.15-22, it takes an even darker turn. Pharaoh, desperate to control the Israelite population, orders the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, to kill all newborn baby boys.
This act is truly horrific, but amidst this darkness, we see the courageous faith of these two women. They feared God more than they feared Pharaoh and refused to carry out his wicked decree. Their defiance reminds us that we always have a choice, even in the face of overwhelming pressure, to stand up for what we believe is right, to choose life and compassion.
Absolutely, their bravery is inspiring. Moving on to verses 2.1 to 10, we encounter one of the most iconic figures in the Bible, Moses. His birth story is a gripping tale of a mother's love and God's providential care. Faced with Pharaoh's death decree, Moses' mother Jochebed hides him for 3 months and then places him in a basket among the reeds of the Nile River, trusting that God will protect him.
It's a remarkable act of faith. And as fate would have it, Pharaoh's own daughter finds the baby Moses and, moved with compassion, decides to raise him as her own son. It's a twist of irony, wouldn't you say? The very person who ordered the death of Hebrew baby boys ends up raising the one who would eventually lead them to freedom.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Verses 2.11-25, fast forward to Moses as an adult. He sees an Egyptian overseer brutally beating a Hebrew slave and, filled with righteous anger, kills the Egyptian. This act forces him to flee Egypt and seek refuge in the land of Midian.
This incident is pivotal in Moses' life. It reveals his deep empathy for his people and his burning desire for justice. It also raises questions about the complexities of morality, the weight of our actions, and the consequences, both intended and unintended, that can follow.
Now, in verses 3.122, Moses has a truly extraordinary encounter with God. While tending sheep in the wilderness, he comes across a burning bush that is not consumed by the flames. This burning bush, a theophany, becomes a symbol of God's presence, power, and mystery.
From this burning bush, God speaks to Moses, revealing his plan to deliver the Israelites from slavery and commissioning Moses to be his messenger, his instrument of liberation. And it's here that God reveals his sacred name to Moses. I am, W-H-O, I am, a name that speaks to God's eternal nature, his self-sufficiency, his unwavering faithfulness.
What a profound and awe-inspiring moment. God is not some distant, uncaring deity, but a God who is intimately involved in the lives of his people, actively working to bring about their liberation. It's a message of hope and comfort for all of us, even in the face of our own struggles and challenges.
In verses 4.1 to 2.3, we see Moses wrestling with his own doubts and insecurities. He questions his ability to speak eloquently to persuade Pharaoh to lead the Israelites. He even stumbles over his words, telling God, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." It's a reminder that even those chosen by God can experience feelings of inadequacy and fear.
And how does God respond to Moses' anxieties?
God, in his infinite patience and understanding, reassures Moses, promising to be with him every step of the way. He even provides Aaron, Moses' brother, to be his spokesperson.
So in verses 5.1 to 6.3, we witness Moses and Aaron's first encounter with Pharaoh. They boldly deliver God's message. "Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh, consumed by pride and a desire to maintain his control, arrogantly refuses.
Pharaoh's hardened heart is a recurring theme throughout Exodus, symbolizing humanity's resistance to God's will and our tendency to cling to power and control, even when it leads to suffering and injustice.
His refusal to acknowledge God's authority sets the stage for a dramatic showdown, a clash between the power of God and the stubbornness of the human heart.
Before we delve into that showdown, verses 6.14 to 7.7 provide us with a genealogy of Moses and Aaron tracing their lineage back to the tribe of Levi, the priestly tribe. This detail emphasizes their connection to the sacred, their role as mediators between God and his people.
It's a reminder that we're all part of a larger story connected to generations past and future, and that our actions have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves.
Now, brace yourselves, because in verses 7.825, the plagues begin. The first plague transforms the life-giving waters of the Nile River into blood. Imagine the horror of seeing this sacred river, the source of sustenance and life for the Egyptians, turning into a gruesome symbol of death and judgment.
It's a visceral image that underscores God's power over creation and his willingness to intervene in human affairs, especially when injustice and oppression run rampant.
This first plague is just the beginning. The stage is set for a series of increasingly dramatic and devastating plagues, each one challenging Pharaoh's defiance and revealing the awesome power of the one true God. And the plagues that follow are nothing short of extraordinary. In verses 8.132, we encounter the plagues of frogs, gnats, and flies.
Can you imagine the chaos and disruption these plagues must have caused? The Nile teeming with frogs, swarms of gnats and flies invading homes and palaces?
Exactly. These plagues weren't simply about causing discomfort, they were strategically targeted. Many scholars believe they were aimed at undermining the very foundations of Egyptian society and belief.
So each plague had a symbolic meaning.
Absolutely. Take the plague of frogs, for example. The Nile River was considered sacred to the Egyptians associated with the god Hapi. By turning their revered river into a breeding ground for frogs, God was demonstrating his power over their deities.
It's like God was saying, my power trumps your so-called gods.
Precisely. And each plague further disrupted daily life, making it increasingly difficult for Pharaoh to ignore God's demand to let his people go.
But Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. Verses 9.135 bring even more devastating plagues. The plague on livestock and the plague of boils. The livestock plague targeted a major source of wealth and sustenance for the Egyptians, striking at the very heart of their economy.
And the plague of boils inflicted immense physical suffering on both humans and animals, a stark reminder of the consequences of defying God's will. But even these plagues failed to sway Pharaoh.
It's almost unfathomable how he could witness such devastation and still refuse to relent.
Pride and stubbornness can be blinding, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Pharaoh was so determined to maintain his control, his power over the Israelites, that he refused to acknowledge God's sovereignty.
It's a cautionary tale for us all, isn't it? We need to guard our own hearts against pride and be open to God's guidance, even when it challenges our comfort or our sense of control.
Indeed. Sometimes we can be so focused on our own plans and desires that we fail to see God's bigger picture.
Now, in verses 10.1-9, we encounter two more plagues that intensify the pressure on Pharaoh: the plague of locusts and the plague of darkness.
The locusts devoured every green thing in Egypt, leaving the land barren and desolate. Imagine the desperation, the sense of utter helplessness as their crops, their livelihood, was consumed by these relentless swarms.
It must have felt like the end of the world.
It was a stark reminder of God's control over nature and his ability to provide or withhold blessings. And then comes the plague of darkness, described as a darkness that can be felt.
A darkness so thick and heavy it was almost tangible.
Yes. This darkness, enveloping the land for 3 days, symbolized chaos, confusion, and the absence of God's light. It was a stark contrast to the light God provided for his people, the Israelites demonstrating that even in the midst of judgment, God protected those who were faithful to him.
It's an incredible image of God's faithfulness, his ability to shine his light into the darkest of circumstances.
These plagues, each one more dramatic and devastating than the last, are not simply acts of retribution. They are designed to reveal God's power, his justice, and his mercy. They are a call to repentance, an invitation to turn away from wickedness and embrace God's way.
But even after all of this, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened. He clung to his power, refusing to release the Israelites.
The stage is now set for the final decisive confrontation between God and Pharaoh. The tension is palpable, the stakes are high, and the fate of an entire nation hangs in the balance.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Exodus chapters 1-10, it's striking how these chapters lay the foundation for the Israelites' journey from slavery to freedom, a journey that resonates with people of faith even today. What are some of the key takeaways that stand out to you?
One of the most powerful themes is the reality of oppression and the devastating consequences of unchecked power. We see the Israelites suffering tremendously under Pharaoh's rule, enduring forced labor and facing threats against their very lives. It's a stark reminder of the darkness that can exist in the human heart and the ways in which power can be abused.
It's heartbreaking to witness their plight. But amidst this darkness, we also see the unwavering faithfulness of God. He hears the cries of his people, remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and sets in motion a plan to deliver them from bondage. It's a powerful testament to God's love, his justice, and his commitment to fulfilling his promises.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating to see how God chooses Moses, a man who initially doubted his own abilities, to be his instrument of liberation. It's a reminder that God can use anyone, no matter how flawed or insecure they may feel, to accomplish his purposes.
Moses' initial reluctance, his struggle with self-doubt, makes him even more relatable, doesn't it?
It does. His story encourages us to trust in God's plan even when we don't fully understand it or feel equipped for the task at hand.
We also see God's power on full display through the plagues. Each plague, a demonstration of his authority over creation, challenged the false gods of Egypt and underscored the consequences of defying the one true God.
It's important to note that these plagues weren't simply about punishing the Egyptians. They were also about revealing God's glory to both the Israelites and the Egyptians, paving the way for the ultimate act of deliverance, the Exodus from Egypt.
The story of the Exodus is a story of hope and redemption. It reminds us that no matter how dire our circumstances may seem, God is always working to bring about his purposes. His plan might not always unfold on our timetable, but we can trust in his faithfulness and his ultimate victory over evil.
So as we reflect on these chapters, I would challenge our listeners to consider this. How is God working in your own life, even amidst challenges and difficulties? Where do you see his hand moving? Where are you being called to step out in faith and trust in his promises?
That's a powerful question, and it reminds us that we're not simply passive observers of this ancient story. We're invited to participate in God's ongoing story of redemption, to be agents of his love, justice, and mercy in the world today.
Even when we can't see the full picture, God is always working behind the scenes to bring about his plan of redemption and restoration, and he invites us to partner with him in that work.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to Divine Decoded for more inspiring content. Until next time, may you experience the power and presence of God in your own life's journey.